Okay, so I guess I'll start by prefacing that my name is Beautiful Existence, B3, Bella Irons. I have multiple heteronyms. And this is Chris Hansen or Christopher Michael Hansen.
Christopher Michael Hansen, yeah.
And we met fortuitously at the 2025 Harvard Divinity School conference because I'm pretty confident after they read both of our applications, they were like, yeah, we got to put these two people together.
Yes,
Which
yes.
we didn't know until we actually presented, and it was just such a fortuitous happening. At least on my end, I was just so blown away. The entire multi-day conference, they had so many amazing presenters, but it was really wonderful that they curated these sessions and these rooms that they did the way that they did. It was just such a beautiful conference. I can't say more positive things about just the amount of people, the information, the presentations, the artistry, the community, everything, especially related to concepts around religion, spirituality, metaphysics, quantum physics. Like, there was just so much wrapped into it. So that's how I met Christopher or Chris. And I am going to leave it to you to talk more about your work, but let me preface by saying my presentation is on this new literary genre and personage that I have been researching and that I actually am a part of, called Omnidimensional Authors. And I've been building this canon now for about 5 or 6 years, and it's had variations in it, but now I have like a very secure understanding of how I'm quantifying what kind of authors or poets or even musicians or artists of some kind, how they've been receiving, translating, communicating their information, which is mostly through what I have prefaced as alternative abilities. And there's a whole list of those. I carry everything right now in the canon over at cannabistarot.com. And so that's a bit of my research, and a quick synopsis of where I am and how I met Chris. But I really want everybody to understand who you are and what your research was in and what you presented at Harvard and how we made this connection. So I'm going to stop talking. Oh, and then after you introduce yourself, we're going to go through this amazing list that you gave me of these possible omnidimensional authors. And hopefully we can get into a few of them. So, anyways, without further ado, everybody, this is Chris.
Yes, thank you again so much for having me. And yeah, I'm so excited to be here and talking. So yeah, just introduce myself like a little bit. My name is Christopher Michael Hansen, and I am a PhD student in Buffalo, where I'm in the media study, where I'm sort of confusingly in the media department. We'll maybe get to that a little bit, or not confusingly, but we'll get to that a little bit later. My sort of like research interests are, as like after hearing your talk, I've been like, yes, I'm actually interested in omnidimensional authorship. Like that is the word, that is the phrase to use. And so like I sort of chart like a specific history in my work. So at the Harvard Divinity Conference, I was talking, and I'm sure we'll talk about Jane Roberts and the Seth material. My background that I'm using is actually a still from a film that's coming out soon that I made about Jane Roberts and the Seth material. But in general, I'm sort of interested in histories of like spiritualism in the United States, which is a religion that or just a spiritual movement really that starts in Western New York, where I live, and sort of becomes this like really big cultural force and ends up inspiring all of these omnidimensional authors in one way or another. So in that Harvard Divinity conference, I was talking specifically about the Seth material. which is a series of texts that came out between the late 60s and early 80s, where Jane Roberts, who was a channeler and a poet and just a brilliant writer, would channel this spirit named Seth. And she would have these sessions where Seth would come through, and they became this sort of like collaborative environment where a lot of artists and writers and intellectuals would come and sort of hear, Jane channeling Seth. And these were transcribed into a very influential series of books that once I found, I just became totally hooked on, because they're really beautiful. And there's a lot of wisdom in there. But also, like, Jane Roberts as an author is like this, like, she's brilliant. Like her work is just so inviting and warm, and her personal stuff and the Seth stuff together. I mean, they're all interrelated, but just like it's just this amazing, body of work that became extremely influential in America. And at the Harvard Divinity talk, I was talking a little bit about the idea of almost like post-human authorship, and about sort of the how media is used in certain ways to bring these like channeled spirits or channeling into the world, and how especially like contemporary channelers rely on technology, right, to get their to bring their spirits like to us, right? So that is how these messages proliferate. So the importance of media within omnidimensional authorship, I guess you could say. Yeah.
Yeah. I believe that your talk title and your content had the term non-bodied author in it, which immediately was like, because on one side, and if I'm correct, that's like your thesis, right? Or your theory that there are these very distinct beings that are not material, that are corresponding with usually particular people. So your approach of this concept was not only validating to my omnidimensional authors, but my omnidimensional authors are also completely like validating to non-bodied authors or poets or musicians or composers too, because they both work in unison. We're literally like working on different dimensions or different planes, but as a common goal. At least in my mind, that's immediate. I was just like, oh my good God, like there's so much more of this, right? It was such a eye-opening like awareness to me to think, oh yeah, I had been already researching these embodied humans that had these particular skill sets and translations, and really getting into like how did they receive this information and such. And a lot of them do have particular non-bodied beings or entities or guides or masters, whatever the translator is giving to this non-bodied this beingness, but I never considered those beings are still beings. So it was just so boggling to me in a second, and immediately just connected everything. But is that true? Like, do you have this like working theory? Is it called non-bodied authors? Is that?
I've used a couple different terms now, but like at Harvard, yes, it was sort of like thinking about like the non-bodied authors, or I have called it elsewhere. I have like a something in review right now where talks about bodiless authorship, right? Mm-hmm. So just the author without a body, period, right? Like point blank. And yes, and that has been kind of my working theory of like, and there's sort of two very specific ways I think about it, right? There's the idea of, in the case of like the Seth material, where it is like this other entity, like very sort of clearly, right? It's like, Jane Roberts names this entity Seth, right? Or Seth kind of names himself, but, sort of like that they communicate, and it's very named, and it's very sort of the lines are like there's the boundaries are blurry between Jane and Seth, but there are boundaries there are lines there, whereas And I think this is on the list that I gave you, like someone like Jack Spicer, who I love, the poet, talks about this idea of like dictation and poetry coming always from this other space. And Jack Spicer is like, this is kind of the less clear version of that like bodiless authorship, right? Where Jack Spicer is talking about these ideas of, he likes to use the metaphor of Martians, which I love, that, poems come from Martians, like in your head, and then they go out into the world. People thought, he was sort of using that like sarcastically, or like it was sort of a theory, but he very much means like creativity is always coming from this other space that is sort of like beyond the human, and it's bodiless, and it's somewhere in the ether, I guess, right? Yeah. So I think about it in those two very different ways, where sometimes with someone like Jane Roberts, or another author I've been looking into a lot is Chico Xavier, who is like a Brazilian spiritist, and he had a guide named Emmanuel, and these are like very clear relationships. And then there's sort of like the Jack Spicer relationships. Philip K. Dick sort of fits into this mold a little bit of, work coming from somewhere else, and like other entities are just like sort of like just another space, but it's less named, right? Yeah. So that's sort of the two ways that I've been thinking about bodiless authorship, and like what that means, and not just like what it means in this historical context, but also like I do believe creativity always comes from this other space. So what is that, like what is that process, and I haven't found an answer yet, but it's been great to explore.
I would have to say, as an omnidimensional author myself, and somebody who was born into this lifetime with alternative abilities, but not really having those defined for a very long time in my life, partially because I was scared of them, because I was ostracized for them as a child, because they were shunned upon by very religious, communities that I was raised around. There are a variety of reasons that I feel that my life for a while was very clouded, very murky, very ambiguous, around more of a definition, a defining, an understanding, an acknowledging, not just from others, but at least, personally, because when you have these alternative abilities, if you are not raised in a culture that is not just accepting, but even just acknowledging to an extent, which needs knowledge and information sharing. And a lot of this has been purposely kept away from a lot of humanity, kept in secret, esoteric, terms or clubs or initiates or something. But for a variety of reasons, until I started to actually define and step into my own, alternative ability, self, and looking at and extending those practices and stuff, it remains undefined. So I can only imagine now at this level where I'm like adamantly creating this canon so that it can be defined, it can be known, it can be understood for anybody and everybody in the world. Because I honestly believe that we all have these abilities. We all know we're not using even a portion of our brain's, capabilities. AI, what we created is starting to surpass us. Like, there's this huge like evolutionary leap that it seems like we've been driving towards for quite a while. And when I've like researched into or practiced with indigenous persons or ancient technologies and knowledges, we had a lot of this cultivation of it and a lot of these practices. And some cultures still do to a certain extent, and they acknowledge it, they award it, they, recognize it. But myself, thinking about the years that I went through of not being able to name it, to not be able to understand it, and to, compartmentalize it and be able to frame it as something that I had, attributed, to something, when it remains ambiguous, especially if it's throughout a person's life, or if they don't get that confirmation, they don't get that affirmation internally or externally, I can see how it remains really clouded for people. But for myself and others that I've been around that have practiced, alternative abilities and been able to hone in on really understanding the nuances of our bodies, of our consciousness, of the processes that we're in, read into other people's processes, find those commonalities, because we often use different terms and different words depending on the cultures that we've grown up in, or depending on the knowledge that we've been able to seek and find. When you can find those similarities, that's when things start to, in my understanding and my experience, start to really come together. So everybody's just at a different level, right? Like somebody could have went their entire life thinking that it's, just the guides or just Mars or just Saturn. And it very well could be, that beingness. But stepping into, the Akashic records or astral traveling or different planes or dimensions, that, in my experience, is completely separating and ridding yourself of your embodiment, of your I, of your, self, and being able to access different dimensions or planes where information and other beingness can come to you. So, like, for instance, when I talk to nature or tree people or plant people, the way that nature is oriented is of a whole. There are individual kind of personages for different trees and different plants and stuff, but they don't have that ego I like we do at all. They exist collectively. So there's a lot of ambiguity in certain beingness that I've found, at least. So it really kind of depends on if somebody can define it, because there's so many nuances around being able to define it. But that's why I want to do this work, because if there are ways for people to understand, oh, this is what alternative abilities are, this is what they have been called by different cultures and civilizations, this is what the kind of process and feeling or something is of it. Ah, that sounds familiar. And then they can see people that have either self-attributed those qualities and those processes, or they've had other people evaluate their qualities and processes and say, oh, wow, like, I think that you might be clairvoyant. I think that you might be exhibiting this, or this person could have been this, different eras, different times, people had to hide all of this stuff. So, yeah, there's a lot of nuances to stuff, but as with most things, the more that a knowledge can get out there, the more that an understanding around something can grow. Hopefully the better that people can understand, or at least, not be scared of something, not be unsure of something, feel that possibly for themselves or within others, have empathy and compassion. So anyways, yeah, I love this line because I'm very much about this defining. So thank you for clarifying non-bodied, or what did you say, bodiless?
Bodiless.
Yeah. It's really important. I do feel it is important, because when you're trying to produce a new genre or a new personage within like a major part of our world, like literature or media or something, people want the definitions. They need the definitions. They need to understand, okay, how are you quantifying this? How are you seeing this? But it's not that hard to start seeing, especially for somebody like you and me, when we have lists of people that are exhibiting the same qualities, whether self-described or other people describing them, and they're receiving information from somewhere. Dimensions, planes, beings, they're receiving information that they are clearly stating over and over. It is not coming from within. It's not coming from that I. So
yeah. And just like to your point too, a little bit, is I think part of the for me, part of the like excitement in doing some of this work is it, like, I still feel like I'm scratching the surface, like, despite that, the fact that it's been, I think about 3 years since I've like specifically been focused on this kind of work, but even longer within a very similar world. It's sort of like I'm still finding different ways people express themselves through or express these sort of like experiences with other beings, right, or other entities, through mostly writing in my case, but like also music, also media, right? And it's like, and I think that there's just not enough time in one lifetime to really to even like really get to the bottom of it. So like for me personally, right, and also just being like a lowercase a academic, right? Like I have we've talked, I think, about our relationships to academia and all of that fun stuff, but just being an academic, I think having to sort of like define, okay, I'm looking at this period and I'm sort of looking at this specific practice, does help a lot to sort of have those like those academic lines.
Yeah.
But it's also very important at the same time to recognize that those are artificial lines.
Yeah.
and that this, and that this even within those lines that, there's so much, but there's, it's beautiful work to do because there's it's so, like you're kind of getting at too, it's so clear that this is like just an inherent ability that we have as human beings, or that whether or not you believe only some human beings or all human beings have access to it, right? Like it's just so obvious the further down you go that that this is like something we've been doing forever, and that other cultures have never stopped doing, really, and that we tried to stop it, and so then it starts to express itself in a different way,
Well, on the shoulders of giants, right? Like our work, it will be the rest of our lives, and that's just fine, because then other people can take it even further after this. But it feels like, and you tell me, but it feels like we have had this acceleration, because if I start looking at the history, and I've traced back to the 14th century so far, and I know that there's even further than that, because I am looking into indigenous histories. There are modern academics like Tyson Yunkaporta, who do a lot of work of trying to encapsulate, this just inherent ancient wisdom that certain cultures have had. I've been looking into Dagara wisdom and Patrice Samay. There are these scholars and these people out there that have been combining, this very ancient history of ours. I've been looking into Babylonian and Sumerian astrology. So there are these paths that we can find where it's very old, right? And there are commonalities. I brought this up with our modern terminology, at least in English, and definitions, and how it's related to other cultures and civilizations. So that's incredibly important for me to keep that perspective, because I'm defining something under our current era and our current English terminology and definitions, but I don't want it to stay there. I know that it doesn't stay there. I purposely landed on omnidimensional because I knew that this was an interwovenness with everything. Time is irrelevant. Once you get into the astrals, that dimensions and planes are irrelevant. And you tell me, it seems like in the last 150 years, there's been more and more and more. And you kind of alluded to it about Western New York and the East Coast and such. But even this list alone that I do want to get into with you, because these are all possible omnidimensional authors that you gave to me, one of which I've already vetted. But I have been researching all of them. They're all omnidimensional authors, and I can list why for each one of them. And I do plan on doing videos for each one of these. So let me know if you want to do some videos specifically about some of them, because I would love for you to come on and share your knowledge about them too, because you gave me this list. But it does seem like maybe you and I have picked up the reins on a scholarship and an academic level, because we now have a canon. We now have legitimate eras and decades and centuries of people that are not indigenous, not ancient, but that are actually known, that have produced work that has been published, that has been noteworthy, that has been all sorts of vetted in so many different ways. And now we can actually go back to humanity and say, look, this has been happening, and this is for real. And like another avenue for people to say, yeah, there are different dimensions, there are different beings, and here's more proof in our way. I mean, let me know, what do you think about the last 150 years?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, for like in my research too, I kind of, because I deal specifically with spiritualism, which, for those who might not know, is like, it emerges in like 1840, in just outside of Rochester, New York, but kind of between Rochester and Buffalo. And it's sort of it inspires this revolution where there's, people who, it starts with the Fox sisters, who begin speaking with a sort of presence that's in their house, right? And it becomes this kind of like local phenomenon, and then a national phenomenon, and then other people sort of see this and recognize and say, hey, I have this like ability too, and I am doing this thing too, and like I've had these experiences too. And it's sort of like you're saying, it gives them like a language, like a new language to talk about it in. And so I think in America, other parts of Europe too, from like the late 1800s onwards, it is this like revolution, and I think people often, when you start talking about channeling or something like that, they're like, oh, like you're just talking about some 60s nonsense. Yeah, they're like, oh yeah, people did that, like, they were taking LSD or whatever, and it's like, no, actually it's we can chart pretty consistently from at least 1840 onwards in America, where these practices are happening all over the place, and also across different, like social economic lines, right? It's also not sort of just contained, like spiritualists tend to be sort of, at least in the beginning, sort of like well-off folks in society, but it soon that language sort of spreads all over, right? Yeah. And it comes about, as I'm a media scholar too, and it comes about during a specific moment where there's also these massive changes happening in society, right? Like, especially on a technological level, you have like the electrification of cities and then homes. You have the invention of like the gramophone and the telegram. And then later you have cinema and photography, which spiritualism have like a very like intricate relationship with, right? Media scholars often, speak about spiritualism for its relationship to things like cinema, electricity, and photography. So you have these like massive changes happening in society. And this is a moment when, that voice of like, hey, other dimensions, other realities are possible, gets louder, right? And I think you do also see that with, like, if you chart the history in the post-war period, when, there's sort of like the rise of like the like New Age spirituality. This is another moment of, I argue that we also are in a similar moment, right? We're experiencing similar like social and technological upheaval or revolution, and that's why, maybe like that's also what called me and maybe what called you towards, really trying to define these things, because they're you don't have to look far to see that they're coming back into the public consciousness again.
Yeah. But if we can, when we come back, if we can get into the list, because there's so many like really interesting people in this list. Like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. I don't even know what this list of possible omnidimensional authors, where it came from, where it stemmed from with you, if it's just a snippet of what you've been looking at. But you just brought so much more variety to what I've already been researching and looking into. And I've kind of, like I said, went off into indigenous and ancient, tangents, because I know that there are people that literally risked their life through the centuries to write about certain things, and they had to be so super protective of it because of the church or whatever was going on at the time. So I've kind of like been branching off into really, really ancient like pathways of similar, abilities and definitions and processes. But your list just brought so much more, because you brought like people that are channeling music. And that in and of itself, I'm just like, what? Like, I knew that this was like media, right? And I have this under like a literary, area and field. Because a lot of this is still going to be considered literature, because it's being written, it's being transcribed, it's being given something tangible for people to read and things like that. But the music part of it, I just, again, when you brought the concept of non-bodied or, bodiless, you are adding just so much more to this. Like, I hope you understand that what I can already sense and feel, and I got from that Harvard conference, was that we are literally creating something that a lot of people are going to like add to in the future, because this is a very significant baseline. I feel that this is a very significant baseline. I have yet to find anybody else in scholarship that is really trying to not just quantify and define, but be able to give this canon, give this awareness with all of these different nuances that are already so incredibly justified and being, utilized and being expressed, and has been for centuries. So I think that you can feel this like significance.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So that's why I'm like standing on the shoulders of giants. You're like small A academic, and I'm like, wait a minute, Chris, like this is actually big A kind of stuff. It's just that we're starting it. You know what I mean? And it's like, oh, just wait. Until this
totally.
catches.
And also just because people have talked about like more niche and specific. Like I have this great book, I could show it. It's like Channeling by John Climo, which is like a big collection of different channeling practices, but it doesn't really go into like the authorship or the artistry. It doesn't really go like what your project is doing, right? As I understand it, is also highlighting that artistry and the creator, like it's a tradition and there's art to it, I guess is maybe one way I would put it. So it's like you're saying, like there's I think that like this canon, right, that's being built is there's nuance. Like there's more nuance than previous scholars have treated it, right, with that. But
there's a baseline. I think you and I have tapped into this foundation of it, and it's just time. It feels like it's just time. And I came to it because I am it. And I was so frustrated about not having anybody that I felt was like me within literature. When I channeled the Cannabis Tarot Oraculum, when I channeled, the Cannabis Tarot, oh, look at that. My first card just came out.
Oh my gosh.
When I channeled the Cannabis Tarot, the Tower card is the first card that came out, and it's a dual meaning. It's a bridge because Madame Lenormand helped me with it, and she produced her own oracle deck, and her Tower is one of the only oracle cards that she has that's like a regular tarot, and hers stands for like strength and governments or bureaucratic systems, or just like really, really, really secure like systems, whereas the traditional tarot card means like crumbling down and everything has to be rebuilt, and oh my gosh. So that's kind of funny that It's
Yeah.
the tarot is very, very powerful, let me tell you. But when I like channel these and I produce these and I give everybody the backstory and I tell them who I was working with and, the beingness and the non-bodied authors. I mean, she's a bodiless author. Madame Lenormand's been dead for hundreds of years. But I didn't see anybody else that was talking about stuff like this. There's lots of people that have produced tarot decks or such, but nobody was talking about how there is this physical being, usually, that is a channel, that is, somebody that has information coming to them in some way, shape, or form. And really, for me, omnidimensional authorship, the biggest caveat is not even the alternative abilities. It's not even the, bodiless or non-bodied authors and the different dimensions or beingness. For me, omnidimensional authorship is about the translation. And that's where the creativity comes in a lot in my mind, or in my understanding and lived experience, because it is our language, our experiences, our authorship, our abilities to read or translate or convey music or language or whatever it is. We have to actually really think about that, or really be able to figure out, how are we going to be able to do it? Is somebody else going to transcribe for us and we're going to orate it? Are we going to automatically write? How is it that it's working through us? But there's still, with omnidimensional authors, there is still this autonomy within our translation, unless they're using, other people to translate and stuff. And in that case, we have laws that have been written for 100 years about this stuff that also quantify omnidimensional authorship in a legal sense. But yeah, I just came to it because I was tired of not seeing myself represented in the world within the literary community. So I have such a passion for all these people. And I can't wait to get into it with you more and this list. There's so much that I want to talk to you about for so long. Like I said, I am going to do a video on every single person on this list that you sent me of possible OAs, because they all are OAs according to how I am trying to classify that right now, which is still a work in progress. But I am going to do videos and go way more into the depth of a lot of these. And because you gave me this list, I want to go over it with you and have you call out, the really fantastical or amazing ones. Obviously, Seth, materials. But if you do want to come back and record with me or do another deeper interview with any of them, please, let's do that. Because I'm pretty confident that you know a lot more about some of these than even I do. And I do want to find other people that are already scholars on these. There are some amazing people on this list that are very highly known people. And I happen to think that there just has to be, other people out there that are real experts on them, that actually worked with them, were privy to their processes. So I'm going to go off of your cue, because I highlighted and made notes for each one of them. So I can speak to what I found out, just preliminary research about what different alternative abilities they had. But a lot of them are the bodiless authors. And so I guess, take it away wherever you would like to start and whatever ones really stood out for you. And I can just, add what it is that I also found out about them.
Yeah, that sounds good. I had the actual list I sent you up, and I need to bring that back up, and I'm sorry to...
No, it's okay. I didn't forewarn you that there was...
No.
I mean, the first one that obviously to me comes to mind is who you've already mentioned, with Jane Roberts and Seth, because you... as I understand, you live in this area, or you lived very close to her house. How did that, I guess, maybe all start for you?
Yeah, sure. Also, just double checking. We are recording right now, right?
We are recording.
Okay,
Yes.
awesome. Sorry to. Okay. If we'll start with Seth. Yes. Seth. So Jane Roberts lived with her husband Robert Butts, who was also an integral part of the Seth material, in a town called Elmira, New York, which is like an hour and a half south of where I live. It's part of the sort of like misunderstood part of New York State that is Western New York, this is a space that has had there's been many sort of like spiritual experiences and spiritual groups that come out of here, right? So spiritualism, which I've already talked a little bit about, as well as like the Latter-day Saints. Mormonism actually comes from Western New York, which not a lot of people know.
Yeah.
But Joseph Smith sort of, allegedly found the Book of Mormon in Palmyra, New York, which is about an hour east of here. There's like also, minor movements, utopian sort of communities that are built, especially in the late 1800s. But Jane Roberts is living and writing in the mid-century. And when, friends sort of sent me Seth Speaks when I first moved to this area. And I, just was kind of enthralled with it because it is just beautifully written. Like we were talking about translation a little bit. And Jane Roberts' biggest strength is her it's her ability to like write, like, because she is a writer by training, right? She spent much of her adult life writing, and just to not only just transcribe what happens in trance, but also comment on it, and she's very funny and and very in a surprise. I think what surprises a lot of people when they come into the material is how down to earth she is too. She's talking about just like going to the grocery store and having a bad day, and then but then she goes into trance and is sort of like speaking these universal concepts. So when I first found out about the Seth material and found out that it was channeled not that far from where I live, I ended up with my friend Salix getting in touch with the Seth House, which is where this material was first channeled. It's this old Victorian mansion that was, at the time split up into a bunch of different apartments. And Jane and Robert lived in one. And we ended up getting in touch with the woman who runs that space. Her name is Oshara. And she sort of runs this really beautiful archive of the Seth material, and has just kind of like dedicated her life to preserving that material and to trying to like tell that history, right? Because it's otherwise would be lost. Elmira is like a really interesting place because it has a Mark Twain used to vacation there, and they push that. They push, like, if you go to Elmira, you can't walk 20 feet without running into something Mark Twain related. Yet, they've not been so great about promoting this history, this really fairly recent history too, of the Seth material. So I guess like maybe I'll plug a little bit of I made a short film with my friend Salix. It's an experimental documentary set in the Seth House, where we just use some of the text from the Seth material that specifically talks about dreaming, and we try to like weave this dream-like narrative through the Seth House. So that's also going to be released soon. So just like a little plug.
Yeah, of course. Because especially if it hasn't, like a lot of these, I think some of these people and authors or poets or artists, other people are not actually going to know there are very well-known ones, but even the well-known ones like Jane, if you're telling me you go to the place where she did this work and there's hardly anything in that area about it, to me, I'm biased. I see that often. There's major things, major people that were artists, and they'll produce one or two pieces that are channeled or they're an omnidimensional author piece, but they won't necessarily see the same height of response, as their other pieces do. So, yeah. And again, I think that's people's just lack of knowledge. So plug away, because the more that people know about this stuff, in fact, I want to make sure I am putting that into my newsletters, and we are putting that up on, my channel about whatever I can do to send it out to viewership, because it is important. And when you're building something like a canon and helping other people understand that this is a foundational expression and personage, and there's processes that have been known and that have been used by many, many people that are very similar, it's important to know that there's other artistry around there, that it's inspired, that there's other history that's still relevant in the house, that this was being produced in. My mind was immediately thinking there has to be a vortex in Western New York, because I know that's true of visiting Western Massachusetts. When I lived in Boston, I absolutely could feel that going out west. So there has to be something happening in different parts, of the world. People know that as ley lines. They know that as different energies and frequencies. And if there's a lot of spiritual movement or spiritualist movement that came out of that area, it'd be very important, at least to me and probably other people, to know there's something that is helping amplify that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and it's interesting because the Seth material even sort of talks explicitly about the vortex, right, that they're creating it, because this is a very special area. And, part of my work has also been making sure that, people around here know that it has this very special energy, for lack of a better word. People in Buffalo love Buffalo, and there's something special here. And I'm like, yes, we can almost verify that. We can look through the history, and I can sort of verify this, that there is something special here. So
I think I might have to do a video for the channel out there, though, with you now.
Yes, I maybe not in the winter, because
I've been in New England winters. No, thank you.
Yeah, maybe we'll wait till it gets nice again, but because it's unfortunately we have about 3-4 more weeks before before Buffalo does the thing that it's famous for, and it gets very cold.
That's about the time that I snowbirded down to Florida. So I digress. I know.
Yes. No. Yes, I'm right there with you. I'm sorry I haven't actually pulled up.
It's okay.
The list.
I'll tell you, and you definitely are already sharing much more about Jane Roberts and the Seth material with what you said. But I do have written down that she's definitely multi-clair, because she was hearing, so she's clairaudient. She was also clairvoyant. She was seeing. She had multiple pathies. So super consciousness, or what other people would call trance mediumship. She was retrocognitive, and precognitive. So she was forward seeing and past seeing. There were synchronicities, and there were definitely astrals that were coming in that I could find. Like I said, this is very preliminary research. I haven't fully dove into stuff. And of course, automatic writing. So all of those things that I just listed are just, even one of them is a qualifier for what I'm calling omnidimensional authorship, let alone having a multi-clair or a multi-pathy process. Because every single person pretty much that you gave me has multiple alternative abilities. And I can attest to the fact that when you start opening up your alternative abilities, even if you don't practice them, you're usually able to minimally triangulate different kind of specialty areas like the clairs or the astrals. And usually the more that you practice something, which every single one of these people on this list admits to practicing for quite a while. Sometimes they'd disappear for years. Sometimes they would come back with a vengeance and, produce multiple works. So, astrology sometimes can equate for that, being in different places and different times and having different energetic experiences in the area sometimes can open up people. But those are the ones that I mostly pulled, from just kind of minimally knowing the trance states. One of the things that I did want to ask you about is with a lot of the authors on this list, there were a lot of Ouija boards that were mentioned. And I'm not sure if Jane participated with Ouija boards.
So Seth actually comes about first, like when they're using Ouija boards.
Okay.
Seth sort of comes about from a Ouija board experience, but it's sort of, that was like Jane's way in to tapping in to that sort of like psychic world, right?
Yeah.
And it's sort of like up for debate whether or not he actually came through the Ouija board, or if it was just sort of like, oh, okay, we've opened this channel, like this is something that's like quite powerful in me, right? And now after these Ouija board experiences, I'm still going into trance, or I'm able to go into trance.
Yeah.
Like I think other sort of Sethies might there's a little bit of debate about the Ouija board and its relationship to Seth coming about in the world, but it is like a fact that Jane and Robert begin to sort of explore that side of themselves with the Ouija board. Yeah,
I immediately poked into that whole kind of like sub category of this with the list, partially because I've had my own Ouija board experience, which I'm very cautious about now. Because years later, after learning kind of my trajectory with using one and how that kind of all showed up within me, I was born knowing these alternative abilities, but it was really experiences around the Ouija board that started to enliven them again, because I had like suppressed them for a while. But it's, in my lived experience, it's also it can be a very dangerous divination if people are not approaching it correctly. And a lot of people are not trained. Ouija boards have been sold as a board game for a very long time. So people have the context of it being like a game. And I'm glad that there have been many, many people that have been able to open up or bridge to other dimensions and planes with them. But I do also want to caveat that that is one of the divinations that it can be more precarious than others, because you don't know what it is that you could be coming through or having come through. But I thought that it was very interesting that on your list that there were quite a few omnidimensional authors, because I only have one right now, which is James Merrill, who is on your list. But I do think that that's a very interesting kind of side note, that could be a very large catalyst. Whereas for me, in this lifetime, my work with cannabis, in particular in cannabis plant spirit as a bridge, has been more nurturing, more straightforward. It's, it's another door that people can open up to. Mushroom people are very much the same. There's a lot of different bridges and doors, and Ouijas are definitely one of them. The other omnidimensional authors that you had listed, like I said, James Merrill is one of them. He's already on the website and the list. I had the Michael teachings, messages from Michael. That was also came out with a Ouija board. And Pearl Curran, who channeled Patience Worth, was that also another Ouija board?
Yes. So, yes. And I also just want to share that that I agree about the Ouija board sort of warning. That's why I don't practice it myself, right? It's I think there are some practitioners where it seems useful and it seems like they're in control of, or not in control, but they have a decent relationship with it. But I do agree that I actually, as much as many of these sort of overlap with Ouija, I'm not. I think that yes, it's complicated, and maybe I'll even just leave it at it's complicated, and that I don't personally practice it.
I don't think it should be sold as a board game. Let's just say that. I think it should come with a much more extensive list of rules. But so Patience Worth, that was a really interesting one. Do you know much more about Pearl?
Absolutely. So, first of all, I actually have a paper under review that talks a little bit more about Pearl Curran, who channeled the spirit named Patience Worth through a Ouija board in the early 1900s in St. Louis, and it's one of the more, for the most part, positive Ouija board spirits, right? Like it's, and there's this incredible book, and I do have it here if we can, there we go.
Singer in the Shadows?
Singer in the Shadows.
Oh, cool.
Irving Litvag. It was written in the late 70s. He was a historian from St. Louis, where Pearl Curran had lived. But it details, it's the best sort of account of Pearl Curran and Patience Worth, the spirit that came through. Cool. So just like to give a little story of Patience Worth and Pearl Curran, Pearl Curran was like a housewife in St. Louis. She was, like a lot of accounts of her call her unremarkable, right? Like, and I don't love that terminology, but just to say that she was a very normal woman at her time. Normal, yes. Yeah. And she, began playing with Ouija and using Ouija as a parlor game, which was incredibly popular at the time. This was around 1910, 1912 was like when she kind of first has these experiences. And she starts using Ouija with her friends as this parlor game while, their husbands would be smoking cigars in another room. And pretty quickly it becomes clear that Patience Worth, or that Pearl Curran rather, is channeling someone else. And this someone ends up being named Patience Worth, right? That's like they find out eventually that this is the spirit that's coming through. And Patience Worth is a writer, and she's from, I believe, 18th century England. And that, there's this sort of like actual history, unlike Seth, who is sort of, an omnidimensional being. Patience Worth is the spirit that is sort of like named and placed within a time. And through the Ouija board, Pearl Curran starts to write these really beautiful stories in, style that would have been popular in 18th century England. Despite not having any sort of like, she never really had any like formal writing training, like she had fairly minimal education. So it's clear, that something else is sort of working through her. And that something else is Patience Worth. And it wasn't uncommon at the time that that like Ouija board literature, it was happening elsewhere, right? Like there were other accounts of stories and poems being published that had come through a Ouija board, but none of them were quite as intricate and just as of the quality, right? That was coming through Pearl Curran and through Patience Worth. So, at the time, she attracted a lot of attention in St. Louis, specifically from the sort of like literati, right, of the time. There was in Singer in the Shadow, there's this great chapter about this real old school editor of a local newspaper who had a lot of power at the time, and he was a big literature aficionado, and he was harsh. He was a hard critic, and he comes to see Pearl Curran channeling Patience Worth, because she would do this much like Jane Roberts. She would do this publicly. There was sort of this, she ended up sort of making a living off of performing her trance, right? Yeah. Which eventually caused more issues down the line, but for a time that was sort of like how she ended up earning a living. And this editor comes, and he's there to like, this is like all bullshit, and and none of this is worth my time. But he goes and he's impressed, and he ends up publishing her and publishing a number of her stories. And then eventually a number of novels that Patience Worth was writing through Pearl Curran, and they become quite popular. They've mostly been lost to time, just in the fact that like they're not necessarily as valued today as they were, 100 years ago. But she writes this body of work that is, it's literature. It's through Patience Worth, even though it's attributed to Pearl Curran. But it's very, it's very beautifully written. I mean, I've read some of the stories, and they are very beautiful to read. It's very beautiful poetry.
Well, we're going to help revive it.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. And it's, it's just this like fascinating account of like this, this channeler who is just working with this being that is so, such a natural writer, right? It's really this like very clear idea of, it's not, the text itself is not particularly like spiritual in, as like the case of Jane Roberts, right, and Seth. It is just pure literature. It's very beautiful. And so it's a really incredible account, of this sort of like omnidimensional authorship happening at a time, in a place where this kind of thing wasn't necessarily like, it didn't, they didn't even really know what to make of it.
Yeah.
And I would just highly recommend this book, Singer in the Shadows.
Absolutely. I got to add that to my list too. Thank you.
It's fantastic. Yeah. So
I love this, and thank you for like, it's good to talk about Ouija boards or bridges or different alternative abilities and tools, because there's a lot of tools. When I list alternative abilities, there's so many different tools. When I say divinations, there's a ton of divinations. There's so many in the world, and especially through ancient cultures and stuff, that, I mean, we are literally just like starting with the basics right here, and there's just going to be like hundreds, if not thousands, once it gets built out, especially with the tools. But Ouija boards definitely showing up as a prominent one, and I think it was more culturally available, to a lot of people, because it did get sold like as a board game or as a parlor game at the turn of the century. I'd be very interested to see if he published those under Pearl Curran, or if he published those under Patience Worth, because there is a law over 100 years old that establishes that mediums that channel the work is actually of the authorship of the rights of the medium, or I guess the omnidimensional author. So I'm already finding some things where people, the publisher or the publication, whoever, they put authorship on something, which unfortunately often in the previous centuries was not always properly attributed to female-born and identifying persons. In fact, there were males that stole a lot of female-born omnidimensional author transcripts and information, and that's how that case came about in 1927. But it has been for almost 100 years. Next 2 years, it's going to be 100 years that there's been an actual international law on the records that says that omnidimensional authors basically have legal rights. So I'd love to see who he published those under, because that could also be another validation point for, bodiless authors or non-bodied authors. And this is those nuances, that we start getting into, because we're not dealing with regular time and space. Obviously not. It's omnidimensional here. A couple of the other ones that came up with Ouija boards was Susie Smith, Confessions of a Psychic from 1971. I think those were the only ones. But also, I thought it was really interesting that, like, Jack Spicer and the Holy Grail from 1962, who you brought up earlier, and who he started attributing to Mars or Martians, and especially Sun Ra and Space is the Place from 1974, how they directly attributed the information they were getting from Saturn. Because speaking with the celestials is actually a practice that I have brought into my, portfolio of alternative abilities in the last 5 years, especially since 2020. I've been looking into and just personally been under a practice of speaking with celestials more and more. So I thought that it was very, very interesting that you also brought a couple of people into this that are definitely, attributing different alternative abilities like multi-clair, Jack Spicer, clairaudience, claircognizance, mediumship, Sun Ra, definitely astral traveling, synchronicities, multipathies with precognitive and retrocognitive descriptions. So absolutely omnidimensional authors, but I thought it was very diverse, the people that you've brought into this list. And I'm still, like I said, seeing aspects of even myself, that are even attributed to other scientists like Rupert Sheldrake and his solar consciousness or his sun consciousness theory. So it's very interesting and varied, the authors that you brought in.
And like, just on that note of, like, speaking with celestials, I do think, there is this, like, movement in, and it starts around, like, the 30s, right, where, it's interesting just as much as an individual can sort of, as shape and come into their abilities over time. I think that culture also, like this sort of this historical culture sort of, finds these different paths, right? So, the original spiritualists and then people like Pearl Curran are, sort of specifically channeling the deceased a lot of the times, not always, but like in this case, it's sort of like somebody who once existed. And then there's this move, and it starts actually around the 30s. There's someone named George King. I can't remember, Dr. George King. I can't remember if I put him on the list.
King.
But yeah, and he starts, he's not the first, but he's one of the more prominent examples of speaking with celestials.
Yep.
And
Mars Sector 6.
Okay, yes, yeah.
Dr. George King and the 12 Blessings, 1956. Sorry. But
yeah,
yes.
No. But, and from there, it sort of, opens up this, this idea that there can be like interplanetary communication,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or that's more of like the language that they would have used, right? That that by the like 50s and 60s, then you do end up getting people like Sun Ra, who, I mean, just what an amazing like artist, human being, if just this like, I mean, legendary, right? I mean, he's you can tell I'm just excited thinking about him. But where he is he's also like he is an alien. He's like, I am from somewhere else. My consciousness is from somewhere else. And he even opens up this sort of door for this other kind of expression, right? You even see groups like Parliament Funkadelic, who I love, sort of doing a very similar thing, whether or not they actually, like, where Sun Ra is very adamant that, he is having these conversations, he is channeling this consciousness, and, maybe like groups like Parliament Funkadelic are not quite as adamant that that their music is coming from this other space, but it sort of opens up this whole new genre.
Yeah.
And opens this beautiful door that continues to like inspire people. And we've been talking mostly about literature, but music, this sort of channel music is actually one of the largest ways that people start to actually learn about these sort of like other abilities. I also think about figures like Alex Coltrane, who
Yes.
Just, I mean, again, it's
yeah,
like,
she's on here.
Yeah, where she is especially like later into her life, sort of directly channeling this music, and working with her ashram on she builds a community around it, and that for so many people is like a gateway into this world, and I think that's really beautiful.
Music is definitely that way. Yeah, I was really impressed, not just with Alice Coltrane and multiple alternative abilities for sure with her, but with Rosemary Brown, and that she was channeling deceased composers and producing like an amazing portfolio of brand new like musical pieces. And I saw that there's like controversy that she actually had like a really extensive music background, but it was also written that she did not have the type of musical composition knowledge to be able to do the pieces that she was doing, and that there were actual scholars that were specialists on particular composers' music and their styles that looked into compositions that she had supposedly channeled, and they said there's no way that somebody would be able to get these nuances of that particular composer and their style from that era and time period in this way, other than if they were bringing somebody through. So yeah, music is definitely a big one on the list too.
And Rosemary Brown is such a fascinating case because she's been kind of lost to time, right? Like, she has one sort of record that like was ever really, like published. There's other recordings and there's other, music that she produced, but there's only really one sort of like major album. And I've been looking for the vinyl forever. I would love to, but it's very rare. And I'm putting it out into the universe that, hopefully one day it finds me. But Rosemary Brown is such an interesting example because, like you said, she's this composer that, is channeling Bach and channeling Mozart, I believe, channels a number of composers.
A lot of them.
Yeah, and what's interesting is like she actually just like challenges the conventional way that we think about creativity, right? Yeah. Like, yes, you can write in the tradition of Bach, like you can absolutely do that, but it's like you're saying, these nuances that come through are a result of having these sort of conversations, that aren't happening here. They're happening elsewhere. So, yes, you can, now you can probably, have artificial intelligence even create a composition in the style of Bach, but there's something different happening with Rosemary Brown, where she's sort of clearly having these conversations elsewhere.
So we were just talking about the different pieces of music in this omnidimensional author list that you shared with me. One of the other things that stood out for me, a couple of others, is that you included an omnidimensional author named Emanuel Swedenborg, which is from the 18th century. So I like this because this is getting into that historical aspect of things. Yeah, we've been talking about the spiritualist movement. There's definitely been a reawakening and, a compiling, an emergence that's definitely happened in the last 150 years of more and more people stepping into their alternative abilities, expressing them through literary or media means. But this one goes back, and this starts to help show just how much this has been, going on, even within modern history. I mean, our known history of 10,000 years of written language and symbology and things like that. But, the further back that we can trace, which is hard, because a lot of people were condemned for publishing pieces that were not under the religious context of the day. But this one was an interesting one to hear about. Do you know more about Emanuel? And it's called Heaven and Hell, 1758. And it was produced in 1758.
Yeah, so he's a fascinating figure because he's actually within this sort of contemporary era, right? And often seen as one of the genesises of sort of both spiritualism and this sort of second great awakening, right? As well as sort of later New Age spirituality, and yet I think that unless you're a religious studies nerd like I am, we are, right, that you might not know too much about him. So I haven't, I want to just sort of preface this by saying I've only read a little bit of his work, and I've only done because there's scholars, right? There are Swedenborgian scholars, right? Who really spend their lives thinking about him. He actually is quite an influential figure, even if he is unknown to most. But he was specifically seeing angels, right? That was sort of what he was known for. He was seeing angels and sort of receiving this guidance, right? From what he saw as angels, and this actually led him to sort of start this new religious movement that was later called Swedenborgianism, or I believe the New Church is also sort of the same. That was sort of adjacent to Protestantism, but actually much more progressive in a lot of ways. And Swedenborgianism and his writings lead to much of the sort of more progressive approaches towards Christian religion, right, in the 1800s, but also these sort of breakings from the church and even from the Protestant church that become some really fascinating things later on down the line, including spiritualism and also can be seen as a factor in certain progressive social causes, right? Abolitionists, for instance, really liked Swedenborg. So he's the interesting thing for me about him, and that that you're kind of getting at, or we've kind of been getting at in our conversation, is it's hard to place the start of, because there is no it's as old as we are, or it totally goes. But for me, like I said earlier, the sort of artificial boundaries, right? I think within a Western context and within an American European context, Swedenborg is somebody who's really important because he is a starting point, not the starting point, but just a starting point for a lot of these movements that come much later. And so I think that, he, within a certain history, he's this extremely important figure because he is able to break away from so much of like the dogma of especially like Protestant values specifically, right? And also sort of start to like within, because he would consider himself a Christian, and within that space sort of start to open up these ideas of of communicating with other beings, whether they're angels or aliens, later on. Just like a totally there's some great like institutions that still do work with him or on him. There's a pretty, I think the most prominent like Swedenborgian Institute is in Pennsylvania, and I used to live in Philly, and it was like they had this amazing Swedenborgian library not that far from where I was living at the time, and I kind of wish I had taken a little bit more advantage of it, but so he's very important figure that if you read like any sort of channelers from like the 1800s or early 1900s, they will often cite him. Someone who's not, I don't believe is on the list, is Edgar Cayce as well, who was a trance mystic also in Pennsylvania, or not also, but in Pennsylvania, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he is very much like in the tradition of Swedenborg, and he also sort of opens up this sort of whole new culture in America of these things that we talk about. His like research institution still exists in Virginia Beach, and is doing some like really cool work, vaguely related to this, but sort of in its own way. And I'm currently reading this book about him, A Prophet in His Own Country, that I just found at the bookstore the other day.
So, very cool. I love your book references that you're bringing up. And yeah, I have looked briefly at Edgar Cayce, but I knew that eventually I was going to get to some of these more well-known, Madame Blavatsky. I needed to see exactly, what they were. And because you gave me such a great list to begin with since the conference, I'm like, okay, I'm going to start here. But, once this actually starts moving, there's people that are having conferences right now this fall in Italy for, mystics, Catholic mystics. And I'm just like, yep, I can already tell they're omnidimensional author, and I want to be able to go, but there's like, only so much time as a scholar too. But that's really fascinating about Emmanuel. Yeah, he definitely had multiple clairs, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, clairempathy, which is not always something that comes through. And I thought it was very interesting that it seemed like the ones that the omnidimensional authors that had more of the angelic or the traditional religious kind of context were more like empathic, or they were more empathetic, clairsentience. They were exhibiting different types of clairs more prominently than some of the other omnidimensional authors. And he had a lot of astral travel and planes as well, with the different dimensionality with the angels. And in fact, when I started reading into his life and work a little bit, he really reminded me of Dante Alighieri, and made me immediately wonder, did Dante Alighieri actually was an omnidimensional author? I've never looked into that, but it just resonated like immediately. So even just pulling up, omnidimensional authors where I can immediately see there's enough information just on a general Google, search or whatever, let alone actual, looking into the research on them and what they've produced, that they're an omnidimensional author based off of their alternative abilities. But yeah, that came up for me. And I know that we're like ending the time that we have here, and so I want to give you a couple more minutes. But the one thing that I did want to point out on this list, which is rare, and I haven't really seen it very much myself, the Omnidimensional Authors that I have right now, the one that also showed up as a scholar besides Evelyn Underhill, which was Mysticism in 1911, the book that she published, Mysticism. The only other scholar within this area that I found is Sri Aurobindo. And Sri Aurobindo was very much a scholarly person that eventually came into more of his interwovenness is integral. It literally is where integral comes from his and the mother's work at the turn of the century. But he had an academic pedigree and background to begin with. So I was really fascinated to see Evelyn Underhill on this list. Do you want to say a little bit about her before we, close out this interview? Because we're scholars. So it's very interesting to me that a scholar would be on this list of omnidimensional authors because they hold different kind of ways of being a lot of the time that I've found. I am very much in a different expression when I'm in my academic self, like I even am here, but this bridges my, omnidimensional author self too. So it's very noteworthy to me that somebody else has been in this bridge that I find myself in, like Evelyn.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've actually been having conversations about her with my friend Jason because he's reading the entirety of On Mysticism, which is not a short book, but it's she is part of this like milieu, like you're saying at the turn of the century too, there's this sort of brief moment even between like 1890 and like 1920 where probably a little less than that, but where scholars are actually taking mysticism very seriously.
Yeah.
And
parapsychology.
Yes.
It's
yeah.
when parapsychology
Absolutely.
came about. Yeah. As a field.
Yeah, absolutely. And William James, right? Varieties of Religious Experiences is
Carl Jung. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And Evelyn Underhill is, I think oftentimes I think there's and again, same sort of disclaimer with Swedenborg, where, I think that she deserves much more attention, but my understanding is maybe a little bit surface level, but I think that there is a little bit of, maybe sexism too, and into why she is not remembered in the same way that somebody like William James is remembered, right?
Yeah.
And also because, she practices it, right? She is a mystic. And I think that, William James, who's somebody that I love and love to research, keeps this critical distance in his life, even though he's a parapsychologist, even though he's a believer in and adamant about these causes, but he does keep he's very good at keeping a distance within his academic work. You read his personal writings and they're very different than his academic work, and even his academic work is very different from each other. But I think Evelyn Underhill sort of embodies what she writes in the way that that scholarship often discourages, unfortunately. And I think that is maybe part of why she gets lost. But I will say that there is an incredible audiobook, free audiobook of On Mysticism that's available that somebody just sent me. I wish I had a better link, but it is pretty easily Googleable. And it's an open source, audiobook. And I think that is a fantastic way to take in that information.
Yeah, introduce more people.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I recently found a copy of On Mysticism for $1 at a bookstore, and I was excited about it, and I was going to take it home. And then this guy comes up and he's like, "Oh man, I was actually going to buy that. Like, do you know anything about her?" And we started talking. And I was like, "You know what? You take this. You take," and I just hope he's enjoying it.
It'll come back around to you. I'm definitely going to make sure that I do these links. Send me all of the links that you might have about, especially, I know that Internet Archive and a lot of places will have, some really good free media and materials for people. But I love linking all of this stuff because I never know who's going to come across, a different video here and there about these authors. And I want to make sure that people are able to, educate themselves more on what it is that we just naturally geek out on. I know that it's not just us. The conference at Harvard was full of us. And so I know that we have a good community, a robust community in this world.
We need to we're building the links, we're building the links, and
absolutely,
and it feels good to build those links, it feels really good to build those links.
And this has been such a wonderful interview, and thank you for coming on again. And please, before we end, please let people know whatever you would like them to know about upcoming pieces, publications, what you're doing, your work on, what your side research is on, anything that you would like people to know more about you. And I definitely hope that you come back and we can go to Jane Roberts' house in the springtime in New York, and be able to just really capture some of this a little bit more for people. But what could they know about Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a film coming out, like I said, with my very good friend Salix Finna, who I am reminded I need to make the introduction between you two, because she is a dream researcher. She is one of the smartest people, and she is just fantastic in every way. But we created a very short experimental film together that will hopefully be in some festivals pretty soon. And I also have some writing coming out. I wrote for Cornelia, which is an art journal based here in Buffalo, about the Lilydale Museum, which is a fantastic museum of spiritualist art and artifacts. So that will be out. It might even be out as we speak. They were slow to release it, but they had some printing issues, and so it's if you're in Buffalo or Toronto, it's free, and it is also online. But everything is on my website. Or will be on my website once I update it, which is just ChristopherMichael.online. So that's the best resource for finding these things. So
Christopher Michael dot online. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah, ChristopherMichael.online, and I can send you a link to it.
Yeah, please do.
Well. But also just thank you so much again. This is, I feel like I was ranting, or just, you're, one of the few people that I know that I can talk about this openly and without the sort of normal caveats of hear me. It's a little strange, but hear me out, so it's just good. It just feels good to just be able to talk about these artists and authors in the way that I think that they deserve to be spoken about. So thank you again.
Absolutely. Anytime. That's what I'm doing this research for. Like I said, it's important that I see, myself in the literary genre or the literary community, and that there wasn't a genre that really I felt that I could be attributed to in what I was doing, but I'm just creating it. And lo and behold, it's already existed for a very long time. But it's really important because I, felt much of my life that I was not not just being acknowledged, but that there just wasn't any peer group for me. There wasn't a community out there that geeked out on things the way that, you know, you and I have found. And like I said, most of the people that I talked to at the Harvard conference, or that I, you know, watched their presentations and their performances. So we're in the world. We've been in the world. We're seeing. We have a canon. We have a list. Join us. If you think that this is you, if you know, understand any of these authors or musicians or poets or, you know, performance media artists, and you resonate with alternative abilities, or you know, hear this conversation and you're like, yeah, I want to know more about these people because this feels like real, or this feels like me. We're out here in the world, and we have been for a very long time. And, you know, people like Chris and I are just helping to put the resources back out there so that the work doesn't die in the world, and it is able to be known by more generations, and more people can open up their alternative abilities and practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
Anyways, thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. And soon again.
Yes. Okay. I will talk to you very soon regardless. And thank you so much again. I really appreciate this space so much. So yes, thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Bye.
Take care.